Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of our RANT series by popular demand. This is part 2 of our rock biographies and autobiographies show. So if you remember last week, I kind of pulled from my shelves over here a whole host of different rock band and artist biographies and autobiographies that I've read over the last however long, and just kind of talked a little bit about some of the good ones, some of the not so good ones, and I basically asked if you guys want to see more because I got a lot more, and obviously you do. So I have pulled out another stack, and we could probably do a third episode of this because I've got so much more that I haven't even gotten to yet. So I've got a little stack here I want to talk about. So again, we got some really good ones here. We got some that are okay, but most of these are actually pretty damn good. I've got some of the turkeys I'll probably save for the third episode, but I got a couple here right off the bat that I'm going to talk about that are more of the kind of, okay, let's give all the dirt type of a biography, right? This is where you get all the juicy sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So the first one is called Walk This Way, the autobiography of Aerosmith, which they wrote with Stephen Davis, who we talked a bit about in the first episode. Really good author. So, this one, as you can see, pretty thick. If you want to read about all the wild and crazy times with the band Aerosmith in the 70s and the 80s, this is the one, folks. This is the one. They basically let it all hang out. So, you can hear all the stories about the fighting between the guys and the cocaine and the crazy parties and the breakup and the getting back together and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to hear kind of what was going on behind the scenes when Aerosmith first kind of got together, started their meteoric rise throughout the 70s, all those great albums, and the singles, the tours, the drugs, the women, the breakup, the Joe Perry project, and all that kind of stuff. Right here from the horse's mouth. A fun book, whether you like Aerosmith or not. I think that any rock and roll fan will really enjoy this book if you haven't read it already. So here's an example, and I hinted at this on last week's show. This is a book by a band that I do not like, and for the reader who asked why I do not like Motley Crue, they're just not for me. When I was a kid and Too Fast for Love and Shout at the Devil first came out, I was into it. I dug them. I grew tired of them pretty quickly after that. And I will say, though, those first couple tours, they were a pretty good live band. But I just, the albums that came after it, I really lost interest in the band. And, their lack of, real musicality for me. I know some people are going to argue about that. I know Tommy Lee's a great drummer. But I never liked Vince Neil's vocals. I never thought Mick Mars was a great guitar player. And I just found a lot of their songs kind of juvenile as I got older. So, and it kind of all really cemented when they had Whitesnake open up for them in 1987. And basically they blew them off the planet. I thought Motley Crue were terrible on that tour. And after that, I just lost all interest in the band totally. But, however, this book, Motley Crue, The Dirt, was a bestseller for a reason. Basically an autobiography from the band. So if you want to read a rock and roll autobiography / biography and really get all the down and dirty stuff, the crazy stuff, really crazy stuff, this is the book for you. All the sordid tales of drunken, high debauchery that went on behind the scenes during those crazy Motley Crue tours. Like some of the stuff, excuse me, that they talk about here on the tours with Ozzy is just legendary. And you're either going to be totally disgusted by half of what you read here, or, you're just going to be like, that's kind of cool. This is the stuff of legend. So, again, regardless of whether I like Motley Crue or not, this was a hell of an entertaining read. This is probably the top 3 quintessential sex, drugs, and rock and roll books ever written. So, don't miss it. There's also one on Guns N' Roses you probably should check out as well. So, all right. Next, kind of a cool book. I actually have another book touching on this subject that I'll get to in a future episode. But this is really cool. If you're a black metal fan at all, there's various books that are out there that kind of talk about the whole black metal scene, which in itself is, some really weird stuff kind of happened in the early days in Norway. and whatnot, you know, all the church burnings and all that kind of stuff, satanic worshiping and murders and all that sort of thing. Excuse me. Well, this book right here, it's called Black Metal Beyond the Darkness from Black Dog Publishing. This is pretty cool. And not a huge, you know, not a very thick book, but a book that kind of really talks a lot about the history of the black metal subgenre. Talks a lot of the bands that kind of jump-started all, like Mayhem and Immortal and Emperor and Dark Throne, so on and so forth. Get a lot of information on some of the important albums and the bands and the histories of the bands, a lot of photographs. Very, very cool, kind of like table book. That if you have any kind of interest in black metal, either you've been a fan for a long time or you're looking to get into the black metal scene a little bit and find out a little bit more information about some of the really important albums that have came out under the term black metal. This is a really, really good one to seek out. All right, so I got this intimidating stack over here. And next one on the top is a very, very cool book of a very, very influential musician from the jazz scene who, you know, kind of led a very tragic life. And this guy was an innovator, probably one of the most accomplished and acclaimed bass players ever, Jaco Pastorius. Okay, this is the extraordinary and tragic life of Jaco Pastorius, the world's greatest bass player, simply titled Jaco. And of course, written by Bill Milkowski. A great book, a really good book. I actually read this quite a long time ago and probably deserves another read. Basically, the life and times of a musician who was a trendsetter, who was idolized by many. Unfortunately, you know, played a lot, you know, in Weather Report for a number of years, did very, very well for himself, but then, you know, started to develop some mental problems, alcoholism, you know, not a good combination, obviously, with the two, and, you know, at some point kind of became destitute and just, you know, wound up getting into a drunken brawl at a bar and died from the injuries from the brawl. Very, very sad. And, you know, when you stop and think about what Jaco could have done to the world of not only jazz but just music in general had he lived, it's just, you know, it's mind-boggling because I think he was on that trajectory. Again, an innovator just like Hendrix. You know, a lot of people call him the Jimi Hendrix of the bass. And you listen to any of the, you know, Weather Report albums or the Jaco Pastorius solo albums or the many kind of like bootleg live albums from the 80s when he was playing with, you know, like some guys from the Brecker Brothers and Mike Stern, you know, in New York City, in the Village. There's all these great live albums you can find out there. The guy was a genius, taken way, way too soon. So another good one, Jaco. All right, this is a fun book. A fun book with a fun guy. You know, a lot of people ask me from time to time, it's like, if they name a couple of rock stars that you would love to sit down with and have a beer at a pub. And almost, you know, for 20, 30 years, anytime anybody ever asked me that question, one of the guys that always came to mind that sits very high at the top of the list is Ian Gillan, right? Lead singer of Deep Purple. So this is Ian Gillan, the autobiography of Deep Purple's lead singer. A really fun book. You know, Ian's an interesting character. This is not the most well-written book on the planet. But basically, you read this book and you feel like Ian is sitting down next to you with a pint, just kind of talking about his life. He's got stories to tell. Some of them are hilarious. Some of the Purple stories are great. I think some of the most humorous stories, though, are the tales he tells of this time, that year plus that he was with Black Sabbath. I mean, just some great, great tales. You know, what went on at the, you know, that mansion where they were recording parts of the album. Him driving around drunk in the sports car, wrecking into things. You know, the whole first meeting with Tony and Geezer at the bar, getting completely loaded, and then the next day he's hearing reports that he's joined Black Sabbath. He's like, what happened? You know, that sort of thing. But and, you know, of course, all the fights with Blackmore. You know, a lot of that stuff is in here. Really, really fun book by a guy who you just get the impression that never really took himself too seriously. But one of the greatest voices of hard rock and metal from, you know, in the history of. So that's a good one. All right, next. There's a million Hendrix books you can read, right? I've read a bunch of them, and I've actually got one that I've in my stack to be read, another one that I have not gotten to yet. But this one I read about a year or so ago. It's by Charles Cross. It's called Roomful of Mirrors, a biography of Jimi Hendrix. I like this one a lot. Pretty cool. again, what you want to get from these Jimi Hendrix books is a little deeper into kind of what went on behind the scenes, the creation of the albums, and more importantly, what a lot of people try to focus on, but it's kind of difficult, is what really happened in like the last hours of his life, in that hotel room. And this tries pretty well to do that. It's actually a pretty interesting read. So if you're looking for another Hendrix book amongst the many that are out there, Charles Cross, a good one. I enjoyed that one. All right. I mentioned also in the last episode a writer called Mick Wall, who has written quite a few really, really good books on a lot of really popular bands. This particular one is the Symptom of the Universe, the Black Sabbath story. Probably my favorite Black Sabbath book out there, and I've read a few of them. This is as close to definitive as you want to get. Again, if you really want to know everything there is to know about Black Sabbath, humble beginnings, how they got started, shooting to superstardom, the creation of the albums, the drugs, fights with Ozzy leaving, Dio coming in, so on and so forth. It's all here. Maybe they don't spend as much time on the kind of post-Ozzy years as some would like. So if you're really looking for a lot of info on the Dio years, a lot of info on Gillan and Hughes, Tony Martin, etc., you're not going to get a ton of that. But if you really want, as close to exhaustive as possible for the Ozzy years, and they talk a lot about the Live Aid appearance and all that kind of stuff. And I really like Mick Wall's writing. This is the book to get. A lot of fun. Really good read. All right. This book, I love this book. I love this band. And I never really thought we would see like a Wishbone Ash book. However, founder and lead guitarist to this day and vocalist Andy Powell put together this book with Colin Harper called Eyes Wide Open, True Tales of a Wishbone Ash Warrior. This is great. I mean, this, again, it's one of those books where I've never met Andy in person. We've exchanged some stuff on Facebook and what have you. Seems like a really humble guy. And it really comes through in the writing here. It's like you're sitting down with someone, maybe having a cup of tea or cold beer, and for hours, he's just talking about his life and the history of the band and the albums and kind of the many personnel changes, and of course the big feud that happened, which basically broke the band apart, and they wound up going to court with and everything like that, fighting over the name of the band. So you get all of that, and especially the whole court case in depth. And, it's kind of a sad story, but, a fascinating read. He talks a lot about guitars and guitar playing, which is pretty cool if you're a musician or a guitar player. So, and it's a pretty thick book. It goes pretty in depth into the career of Wishbone Ash and, specifically Andy himself. So, if you're a Wishbone Ash fan, you must read this. Must read it. Okay. Here's one recently that I got a hold of by Will Romano. It's called Close to the Edge: How Yes's Masterpiece Defined Prog Rock. Yeah, this kind of falls into the camp of okay, but really dry. A lot of kind of technical information about the creation of the Close to the Edge album. If you really want to get in depth about how the songs were created and how they were recorded and all the different, things that they used in the studio and how they, stuff was tracked and all that, a lot of that more technical information, as well as, why this album is so important in the history of progressive rock, then you might enjoy this. I didn't hate this book by any means, but I just found that it was a really, really dry read. And, I guess at the time I was reading, I wasn't quite in the mood for something like this, but, I was reviewing it for the website. And, it again, talks a lot about the importance of the album, which no one's going to argue with because nobody loves Close to the Edge more than me. But again, just a really kind of complex and dry read. All right, so from there, I got a whole bunch here from Martin Popoff. So we talked on the last episode how much I admire Martin's writing, especially his books, because I think he, more than almost any other writer out there, really dives in deep into the music and the albums. And for a lot of us, that's kind of, that's just as important as reading about, the women they had sex with and how much whiskey they drank and how much cocaine they snorted. So Martin kind of shies away from all that stuff because everybody else does that, and Martin's got away with just, talking about the bands and the music they created. So here we're going to stay on Yes. So Time in a Word, the Yes story. All right, you can see that very old picture of the initial incarnation. Actually, no, this is there's Patrick Perez, so this is the relayer lineup right there. But again, a good kind of, if you're someone who's looking for a nice introduction on the career of Yes, album by album by album, Martin's done that here for you. Okay. A lot of also, he's got a lot of like commentary from other writers and reviewers in here. So, Martin's mainly kind of like a hard rock and metal guy. So here's him getting into prog a little bit. And he used help from, a lot of other folks out there who have a lot, interviewed the band. Martin has interviewed them on numerous occasions. But most of his books are filled with, commentary on the albums, interview snippets, because he's interviewed everybody on the planet. So this is a good one if you're kind of new to Yes. All right, here we got another Popoff. The next few are all going to be Martin. So this is Epic Ted Nugent. Anything and everything you ever wanted to know about the great Gonzo himself, Ted Nugent. Martin's a big fan. If you are, you'll need this book. What's great about this is he really talks a lot and dives into all those great 70s and early 80s albums, and even a lot of the more recent ones. And you get a lot of the information on kind of, what went on with Derek St. Holmes and the various lineups, and just a really great way to kind of, what I love so much about books like this is you read them, and what does it make you do? It makes you want to go out and grab the albums off your shelf and play them again. That's what I love the most about a great rock biography or autobiography. It's got to make me want to go and revisit all the music from the guys that you're reading about. That's a good one. Okay, here's a little bit of an older one from Martin. It's called Rainbow, English Castle Magic. All right? I wish it was longer. Obviously a pretty small book about the Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. Again, a look at a lot of the albums, a little bit of history of the band. I would, and this one is it's barely 200 pages. I would have liked to have seen a lot more on this particular band because I love them to death, especially those early years. In fact, for me, someone could write a whole book. Maybe I should just do it. But you could write a whole book on the Dio years and maybe a little bit of the Graham Bonnet years, and that would suffice for me. But again, another really cool book because you're not really going to find much, if any, books out there on Rainbow at all. So I highly recommend seeking that out. So these next few, I remember when Martin came out with these, I had to have them immediately because, of course, they're my favorite album, a favorite band of all time, and I know they rank pretty high up there for Martin as well. So these are books on Deep Purple. So we got first here, we got the Deep Purple Royal Family, chain of events through 1979. All right. And again, these here are mainly like collections of collectibles, posters, all things related to Deep Purple, tour programs, shots, and posters, and it's like Deep Purple memorabilia. And then there's the Deep Purple Royal Family chain of events, 80 through 2011. Kind of the same thing, but covering different years. Again, taking you through the latter part of Purple's career. All sorts of different things, announcements and singles and 45s and album tracks and posters, tour posters, and advertisements, all sorts of stuff. Very, very cool if you're a Purple fan. And then from there, so we've got 2 books on Purple. These are more of the biography and album by album type of thing. So that we got Getting Tighter, Deep Purple, 68 through 76. You'll see Mr. Tommy Bolin on the cover. Odd choice, you might say, because he only appeared on one album. But I guess we want to give some love to some of the other guys in the band. And again, this was basically a look at the history of the band. First wave. So we got the Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, and Mark 4. And then we've got A Castle Full of Rascals, Deep Purple, 1983 to 09. So then the later incarnations of Purple. You got Mr. Gillan, Mr. Glover on the front. On the back, you got Don Airey and Steve Morse. Let me show you the back of the other one. Okay. So again, just littered with information on the later albums. So we got Perfect Strangers and Up. A lot of cool pictures. Information on the albums. Again, if you're looking for that kind of analysis of the recorded career of Deep Purple, those 2 are mandatory. All right. One more Martin Popoff today. Shoot Out the Lights by UFO. Band very near and dear to me. Again, where else are you going to get a book on UFO? There is a Neil Daniels book out there, but I have not read that. And, just really, this has recently been updated, this particular book. So, if you are interested in reading about UFO and are interested in checking out Martin's book, make sure you get the latest edition because I believe it's got all of this and then some additional material. So, great. If you're a Schenker fan, all the information on the early Schenker years as well as the Chapman era, very, very cool stuff from a band that doesn't get enough love, in my opinion. All right, what do we got here? Gene Odom with Frank Dorman. We've got Lynyrd Skynyrd, Remembering the Freebirds of Southern Rock. Kind of a thin but fun book. Again, mostly talking about Lynyrd Skynyrd from the 70s, up to the plane crash. And, really details that, that whole thing pretty well. So if you, really want to read about a very, very sad day in the history of rock and roll, this is a good book to read. Kind of tragic. But, as we know, Skynyrd kind of marched on from there, although they're getting ready to do their farewell tour and call it a day. So, all right, this actually, I've read a lot of rock bios in my life, but for a good number of years, I kind of took a break from them, and this is the book that got me started back on them again. And this is Heaven and Hell, My Life in the Eagles by Don Felder. This is another one of those kind of tell-all books that just makes reading this type of book so much fun, because here you got a guy who, one of the great guitar players of the last 50 years, who played in a mega band and did some great stuff in that band. But the band obviously flamed out pretty quickly, and then there was all sorts of fighting amongst them, spurned on by jealousies and drugs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the whole story. So here is Don basically telling his side of the story, and it's a pretty intense read. Pretty intense read. One of the better kind of tell-alls, I think, because there's a bunch of them out there, of where the bands broke up and you got each side telling their story. This is one of the better ones. One of the better ones. So I highly recommend that. I think I'm due to reread that again because that was really good stuff. All right, we're winding down here. So here we got Neil Young's biography by Jimmy McDonough, called Shaky. This is also pretty good. This is a really thick one. So this has got everything you need to know about the life and career of Neil Young. Pretty complex individual, as you'll find out when you read this. I honestly, I never knew a ton about Neil Young. Decided to read this on a whim, and actually spurred me on to explore more of his music. I always was into him a bit, but not a lot. Didn't really know a lot about him, the person. This is a great introduction to kind of get you into the life and music and career of Neil Young. So here, a little shout out to a good friend of mine in the industry, Billy James. It's an American band, the story of Grand Funk Railroad. Again, a great band, a legendary band, one of the biggest bands of the late 60s, early 70s. There's no books on Grand Funk out there. It's like, other than this is a good one. Again, it's not the longest book on the planet. I wish it was longer. It's not even 200 pages, but it's, if you just want to read about kind of like how Grand Funk Railroad formed and how they became huge and how they fought with their manager and got screwed over by their manager and all that kind of stuff. And then, the band squabbles and breaking up and all that kind of stuff. It's summarized quite nicely in here. It doesn't go too in-depth, but you get a great snapshot of the history of a great band, Grand Funk Railroad. All right, here's one I was really looking forward to because I love this guy to death, one of the greatest guitar players ever. And, again, it's one of those books that you get excited about, you read, and you get done reading, you're like, not sure if I learned much more about this artist than I would have if I just would have went on their Wikipedia page, right? That's this one. It's well written, okay? It's got some good information in there, but again, you're not going to get anything you haven't already heard. This is Jeff Beck, Crazy Fingers by Annette Carson. Got a classic picture of Beck on the front, all sorts of cool photographs inside. Again, it's kind of like a quick summary of Beck's time in the Yardbirds and, his solo, the Jeff Beck group, and, Beck Bogart and a piece, and more solo stuff and all that kind of shit, all the way up to, like more recent years. So not awful, disappointing, not great, okay? All right, before I get to the most recent one I've read, two more. This was a great book. Another one of those like kind of like tell all the constant, a lot of dirt, sex, drugs, and rock and roll to the max. This is Pearl, biography by Ellis Amber, and of course on Janis Joplin. You know, another tragic figure who had so much talent, but just kind of like buried herself in, you know, drink and drugs and sleeping around, and just was never happy. She had a lot of issues about herself and the way people saw her, which all started from when she was a child, and it just kind of followed her around. She, of course, died way, way too young, and but this talks a lot about, you know, her music, the albums, all the million relationships she had, all the drunken debauchery and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to read all the dirt about Janis Joplin's life, I know there's a bunch of books like this, but this is one of them that I read that I really, really liked a lot. So that's Pearl. And then my second to last one here today on this lengthy episode about biographies and autobiographies. This is Scott Gorham and Harry Dougherty's book, Thin Lizzy, The Boys Are Back in Town. So again, a great little tale of Scott Gorham's career in Thin Lizzy, one of the most underrated bands of all time. This is kind of like it's like a photograph and bio book. Tons of great photos from throughout the career of Thin Lizzy, more specifically Gorham's time in the band, you know, alongside Brian Robertson and Phil Lynott and Gary Moore and, you know, Snowy White and Brian Downey. John Sykes as well is in here later on. There's Mr. Sykes. A very cool book. There's a lot of good Thin Lizzy books. In fact, I'm reading Martin Popoff's trio of Thin Lizzy books right now, so maybe I'll get to them in a future episode. Last but not least, I made a mistake of not talking about this last week. I mentioned it, and then I never got to it. This is the one I just finished just the other day. It's called Fortunate Son by John Fogerty. A really great book. You know, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, Creedence Clearwater Revival and how, you know, the band split up in 1972, if I'm remembering correctly, and how the band was fighting and they got screwed over by their record company and management, and then, you know, they got invited to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the 90s, and Fogerty wouldn't play with the surviving members of the band, and, you know, how his brother Tom, who's also in the band, had passed away, and they weren't speaking for years, blah, 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 blah. So here, you know, there's a lot of sides to every story. So I've talked to some people that are like, oh, you know, Fogerty, he's a dick, you know, he screwed over his band and all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, if you read this story, again, who do you believe? But if you read this story, and most of us know that he was the driving force behind that band. He wrote all the songs and he put together all the arrangements. I'm tended to take John's side to here. You know, I think he got kind of screwed over by his band. They got royally screwed over as a band from their record company, and that's here in gory detail. You know, if you ever want to read a book about the horrors of the music industry and how a band can get totally taken advantage of and screwed over from the art that they created, this is the book to read. And, you know, what Fantasy Records did to Creedence and John Fogerty in particular basically set him on a downward spiral that lasted probably like 20 years. But here, the book, also the second half of the book, the first half is all about Creedence. So if you love Creedence Clearwater Revival and want to hear about the tours and the making of the albums and, you know, what those albums were about, I recommend this highly. Second half of the book is how he kind of goes through all these legal battles with Fantasy, legal battles with his ex-bandmates, reinvigorates himself, successful solo career, wins a Grammy, and finally finds the woman of his dreams that kind of really sets him on a path that's, you know, to happiness. That's something that he was always looking for that never got. So a very, very good book, a very uplifting book, I think, you know, but, you know, again, but part of it's like really sad, but the end is a feel-good story. So I recommend that. So that's all I got for you today. I know I went through a ton of stuff here. I got so much more. So again, if you want to hear more, because if you're like me and you like to, you know, there's so many books out there, and I really kind of research which ones to read, which ones to go after and buy. Some I get sent to review for the website. I could do more of this. So let me know if you like what you've seen here, and I'll do part 3. I got, like I said, shelves of them over there. So a lot more good stuff, some bad stuff I can kind of rank on a little bit. So, you know, whatever. I'm happy to do it. So till next time, I'm Pete Pardo. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. Of course, we're on the mighty YouTube. We got more rants coming up. We've got more new product reviews. We've got some band retrospectives coming up, like I mentioned last week. And we just got to find the time to do it all. So anyway, take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.